The latest on the political crisis in Venezuela, all times local, 8:10 p.m. The political turmoil in Venezuela has led to baseball authorities deciding to move an international tournament away from the South American nation. The Caribbean Professional Baseball League's Confederation announced Sunday that it decided the upcoming Caribbean Series will be held elsewhere, though it did not say where. Major League Baseball had already strongly recommended that players and staff not travel to Venezuela for the tournament. Venezuelan Sports Minister Pedro Infante made a plea Saturday for the series to take place as planned in Barquisimeto, saying the government could guarantee security. Venezuela has been rocked by a new wave of unrest as a reinvigorated opposition seeks to install a transitional government, announced Socialist President Nicolas Maduro. ___7:25 p.m. The U.S. State Department has accepted a new Venezuelan envoy in Washington who was appointed by opposition leader Juan Guaidó. Guaidó is head of Venezuela's opposition-controlled Congress and proclaimed himself interim president last week in opposition to Socialist President Nicolas Maduro. In a statement, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Sunday that Carlos Alfredo Vecchio will now have authority over Venezuela's diplomatic affairs in the United States. Vecchio is a former aide to Leopoldo López, another opposition leader, who is under house arrest in Venezuela. Vecchio fled his homeland during anti-government unrest in 2014 fearing he would be arrested. Pompeo's statement says Vecchio met with Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs David Hale, who reaffirmed the administration's strong support for Guaidó. The U.S. and many other nations argue that Maduro's re-election last May was invalid because his strongest opponents were barred from running. Maduro maintains he is the democratically elected president and says Guaidó is part of a U.S.-led coup. ___6:30 p.m. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaidó says he is going to put a spotlight on authorities responsible for killing anybody demonstrating against Socialist President Nicolas Maduro. Guaidó said Sunday on Twitter that he wants to bring international attention to members of the armed forces, prosecutors and judges linked to recent deaths, which he calls a massacre. The young head of the opposition-controlled Congress declared himself Venezuela's interim president last week as part of a campaign to remove Maduro. His declaration during a day of widespread anti-government demonstrations has been followed by violent clashes between protesters and security forces that have killed at least 24 people in recent days. Guaidó is urging UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet to visit Venezuela and witness the crisis herself. Opposition supporters have spent Sunday handing soldiers leaflets explaining a proposed law that would provide amnesty to anyone who helps return Venezuela to democracy. Maduro maintains he is the democratically elected president and says Guaidó is part of a U.S.-led coup. The U.S. and many other nations argue that Maduro's re-election last May was invalid because his strongest opponents were barred from running. ___2:20 p.m. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaidó has renewed his calls for soldiers to abandon Nicolas Maduro's socialist government, speaking after a mass honoring more than 24 civilians who were killed in anti-government protests. Guaidó was swarmed by television cameras as he stepped out of a Roman Catholic church on Sunday and said he'll continue to press forward with plans to install a transitional government in Venezuela led by himself and members of the National Assembly. Opposition supporters staged visits to military bases across Venezuela earlier in the day, handing soldiers copies of an amnesty law passed by the National Assembly. Some military commanders ripped the handouts apart, but no violence was reported. Meanwhile, Maduro toured 2 military bases west of Caracas, where he played war games with soldiers and urged them to stay loyal to his government. ___1:35 p.m. President Donald Trump's national security advisor is sending a new warning to the government of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. John Bolton sent a tweet Sunday warning there would be a significant response to any violence and intimidation against U.S. diplomatic personnel, Venezuela's Democratic leader, Juan Guaido, or the National Assembly itself, the U.S. last week announced it considers Guaido the legitimate leader of Venezuela on the grounds that the socialist Maduro's May re-election was fraudulent and the Congress led by Guaido is the only legitimately elected national body in the country, assertions Maduro fiercely disputes. The U.S. refused to accept Maduro's order to close its Caracas embassy, though Maduro's government on Saturday said it would ease the deadline for the diplomats to leave. ___12:30 p.m. Pope Francis is calling for a just and peaceful solution to Venezuela's political crisis that respects human rights and works for the good of all people. Francis said Sunday from nearby Panama that he was feeling particularly close to Venezuelans in these days of crisis. The Vatican hasn't said if it would back opposition leader Juan Guaido in his claim for the presidency, which has been backed by the United States and other regional leaders. Several years ago, the Vatican was frustrated in its attempt to mediate between socialist President Nicolas Maduro and Venezuela's opposition, which has the backing of many Venezuelan bishops. In his comments Sunday in Panama, Francis asked the Lord to seek and find a just and peaceful solution to overcome the crisis, that respects human rights and exclusively seeks the good of all people, ___12:25 p.m. Israel has recognized Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's interim president. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu issued a statement Sunday saying Israel was joining the United States, Canada, most of the countries of Latin America and countries in Europe in recognizing the new leadership in Venezuela. Venezuela severed diplomatic relations with Israel in 2009. Last week Guaido declared himself interim leader on grounds that Maduro's re-election last year was fraudulent. ___1 a.m. Venezuela has defused a potential showdown with the United States by suspending a demand that U.S. diplomats leave the country even as Washington called on the world to pick a side in the South American nation's fast-moving crisis. Venezuela's foreign ministry says it has extended a deadline for U.S. diplomats to leave following its rupture in relations. It says it will provide a 30-day window for negotiating with U.S. officials about setting up a U.S. Interests office in Venezuela and a similar Venezuelan office in the United States. Venezuela had given U.S. diplomats 72 hours to leave after the U.S. recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's legitimate president rather than Nicolas Maduro.